Applause.
Okay. Hello, this is working, cool. Good day, everyone. I'm Fredrik. I run a company called Dune, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how the revolution will not be reported quarterly. So, if we zoom out from our cool crypto industry a little bit and think about data in the world and in the world of technology and in the world of business, what does that look like? Well, typically, data has been locked within different businesses. All kinds of data that happens in the digital realm, but also in general, mostly sort of is created and stored and analyzed and utilized inside of businesses. So it's actually been quite a closed environment for data in general. And if you do want to access data that you don't already have from your own business or activity, typically you have to pay for access. So most data is inherently closed, and if you do want to get access, you have to pay for it, which makes it even less accessible. And then if you think about the world of finance, the case is that basically the only data you have is trading data when it comes to real time. So if you want to look at real-time data, you only have this kind of metadata around trading, like order books and transactions happening. But that is actually quite a different world from sort of the underlying assets that's being traded. So financial data is sort of a meta thing in the world of finance itself. And so basically that's how data works generally. And if you actually want to understand how a product is doing, you typically, first of all, need a listed entity, a listed company. And then secondly, you will get information about the actual product traction, the actual revenues, the actual operations in a quarterly PDF. That is essentially how you get data in the business world and in the finance world that is not simply metadata around trading. So if you want to understand how some business is doing, you have to wait for these once a quarter PDF files and get some data out of it. And then in our world, in crypto, on the other hand, things are, of course, quite different. So a way to think about the blockchain is essentially that it's a shared public backend. Everybody deploys some code to the common same backend all across the world, whereas in this previous world we were talking about, most of that goes on closed servers and are closed systems, and all the data is contained there. And so when you have a shared public backend for the whole world, that also means, whoops, anyone can analyze it. So you have a bunch of data out there that anyone can look into. And this is quite a profound change from anything we've ever seen before. So what you have here then is a real-time, flexible, and collaborative environment for data, which truly, truly hasn't existed before. And all of these frogs on the internet can come together and look at this data. So just take an example of a bank. So this is the quarterly earnings report of JP Morgan, one of the biggest banks in the world. And you get interesting data like active mobile customers up 11%. That's the level of granularity information you get on a quarterly basis. You get these highly, highly aggregated numbers every now and then, 4 times a year. That's the level of understanding you have in the operation of one of these banks. And if you contrast that to something like MakerDAO, which is also kind of a bank, things look quite different. So you have here, for instance, you can see real-time financial statements. You can take the same thing that will typically go in these PDFs and follow it real time. And look at here's, for instance, the revenues, the lending income of MakerDAO. You can look at the breakdown of their balance sheet in different assets, how that's moving over time. And all of this is obviously accessible to the public at all times. So one can then wonder, who has the best access to data about their system? Is it this guy running one of the world's biggest banks? Or is it actually this guy, a frog on the internet, anyone with an internet connection, who can really know the best, the risk exposure, all the things happening in these systems? And I would argue that actually, if you do really care and want to figure this out, it's probably easier for this guy to figure out what's happening in Maker than it is for this guy to figure out all of his balance sheets and risks. Of course, we don't really know what he's looking at because that's not public. But what I do know is that this guy has a pretty powerful set of tools to figure out what's going on in Maker, for instance. And beyond that, you can look at a whole sector at once, which is also a completely new thing. And for instance, the decentralized exchange space, you can look at all the different players and who's having what traction, which is totally unique, and it's quite brutal, I would say. You put all this naked out there for anyone to look at. But it's also very, very useful and powerful. And stuff like this is 5 lines of SQL, and then anyone on the internet can see what's happening in these systems. And that is, So I think that is very profound because you not only have a open foundation for building things, but you can also understand what those things yield in terms of traction, in terms of actual usage. And then you can adjust accordingly, which means that you not only have all of these building blocks, you have all of this knowledge around what those building blocks led to, which I think is a massively underrated aspect of this space still, that you have that dynamic, which means that people can learn faster, don't have to do the same mistakes as someone else did, and really you have a sort of building and knowledge loop that spins way faster than any other industry. And there are many, many interesting examples. So brilliant tech analyst Bendik Evans, earlier this year in January, wrote in his newsletter that OpenSea did around that 13 billion valuation. Would be interesting to see that fundraising deck. And the funny thing is, essentially the fundraising deck is on-chain. The traction is on-chain. And you can see here that sort of around the time when they did this round, they did almost 5 billion in monthly trading volume of NFTs on Ethereum. That was a 625x from the year before. I think this is January to January. So you don't really have to wonder, what these dynamics are. You can just look at it. And furthermore, you can now see that, the volumes of OpenSea have dropped 90% from January to August here, from almost 5 billion to 500 million. And similarly, you can also then see, since you know what they're taking in fees, that it went from 400 million in revenue to 12 million in revenue in the same amount of time. So this is all out there, and anyone can inspect it. Furthermore, it's not only the sort of crypto native companies per se that's exposed here and anyone can see. Recently, this dashboard went quite viral, where this brilliant guy, King James 23, put together a dashboard for revenues from NFT projects for the top brands. Nike, Dolce & Gabbana, Tiffany, Gucci, all of these. And you can see here that Nike is on the throne with $183 million in NFT revenue. That's pretty significant. And so probably, this will incentivize more brands to do this when they see exactly how much can be made for doing these type of projects. So it's quite fascinating that this doesn't only apply to sort of radical crypto projects. When you have a public open backend, it applies to anyone building on it, including the biggest brands in the world. And it also allows us to build better systems. So it's not about only sort of each product, but you can also here, for instance, see MEV, miner extractable revenue, and you can see that that has yielded these extractors $660 million in gross profits. And that means that you can build products that are more resilient to these things. You can see it, you can look at it, you can analyze it, you can see how your system is exposed to it. And so it really tightens the evolutionary loop and let more people build better products faster. One can, of course, also look into each system that is built, the status of it. For instance, obviously, the merge is hopefully happening this week. And you can see whether it's happened, all kinds of details around it. And it's quite remarkable that this information is out there public to anyone. So essentially, what we have around the blockchain is a collective sort of brain to analyze this data. All this knowledge that exists is shared, is public, which is a massive, massive change from any industry we've ever seen before. And any day when something happens, someone will analyze it, someone will look into it, and everybody can build on top of each other. You don't have to build in silos. So I think all in all, this is a quite underrated aspect of the crypto industry, is that you have all this open data and what that means for how the space evolves. And so to sum it up, I think, in traditional finance, all data is siloed. It's basically only B2B. There's no open community angle to any of this. All data is locked down. You have hedge funds paying enormous premiums to get the slight information advantage in the world. You have to pay a lot to really get to the juicy stuff. And once a quarter, you will figure out how these businesses and systems are actually doing. But in the crypto world, it's radically different. Everything is collaborative, and you can see what other people are doing. You can see the data, you can see who analyzed it, and you can see anything that was ever done, from the code to the traction. And this makes it compounding, which is extremely powerful. So any of you curious about something can go out and look at thousands of analysis that's already been done. It's free, which also a radical difference from any previous data paradigm, and it's also real time, which is quite insane to think about, that you can look at a bank-like system like MakerDAO, and you can see their revenues block by block. You can see their profit and loss statement, since they also pay people from their DAO. So you can really follow real time what's happening deep down in the system. And there are no limits to what you can analyze and how you can slice and dice it. So I really think still that this space has some amazing advantages in how you can build relative to traditional finance, but also some amazing advantages in how you can understand systems and work together to understand systems and what that means for building and progressing. So that was all I wanted to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So, questions?
Thank you. Quick question on how worried are you about the correctness of the data you're querying? Because I think a lot of the data on Dune comes from the graph, right? Or is all of it from on-chain, directly read from the smart contracts?
Yeah, we don't use the graph, so no, it's all from the node providers, various node providers. But yeah, it's all on-chain.
So how worried are you about the correctness of the data? Because in essence, you are becoming an intermediary to reading the data, and there was this little, not exploit, but situation where the graph's data on Aave was actually incorrect, because there was some migration problem from V2 to V3. So people relying on that data that were no longer looking on chain, there was a possible exploit. So I'm just wondering, do you have any mechanisms in place to guarantee the correctness of data or any mitigation against that?
Yeah, we're extremely concerned with getting the data right and having the right blockchain data. It's not as trivial as one might assume, but we're, of course, really care about that. It's not always easy to get it right, sort of, when the blocks happen. Weird things happen sometimes, and that could be in the actual node, or something that happens in the blockchain, or some node provider doing something, and there are changes in these things. But for us in general, it's absolutely critical that we have the right data. And then, of course, on top of that, people can write arbitrary SQL on Dune, so we can't guarantee for sort of every single dashboard out there. But the base tables and what comes from the blockchain, we care deeply about getting right. And if something happens, we sort of do everything we can to fix it as soon as possible.
Another question here.
What are some of the things you're kind of most excited about right now when you look at the roadmap and the space for your team in the next maybe 6 months?
I'm quite excited for analyzing data cross-chain. So this is something we've worked hard to enable. And as these layer 2 systems go live and go on mainnet and really get into sort of their V1 states, I think it's going to be extremely exciting to look across different execution environments and layers and see where the usage actually happens. I think we haven't really sort of understood that yet. There's a lot of, I think, generally meaningful hype around, or sort of credible hype around some of these projects, but it's going to be powerful to see exactly how many users sort of stick around on these different systems and stack that up against each other. Because I feel like it's been a massive narrative the last year or so, but we still don't exactly know what it means. Like how quirky is the UX to actually get onto these systems, and like how many people will actually go there.
Anyone else? Or you want to ask more?
Just a curiosity, you guys index things like calls, events, you have like prices table, it's a huge amount of data. What's the order of magnitude of data that you're dealing with in your databases and tables, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, no.
Just a rough guess, the thing.
I don't think I have the exact number like all over, but I do know that we just saw the other day that we do 500 gigabytes of Solana data per day. That we process, so that gives you a feel for it at least. Yeah.
Anyone else? Yeah.
I think one of the cool things that I heard with Dune is like teams are starting to use Dune as kind of to understand what's happening in their protocol. To like give an oversight of what's the health of the protocol, what users are doing, if it's functioning properly, which I think is like a really cool use case, because it's really important that companies and protocols understand what their users are doing and how things are going. Is that like an area in terms of an application where you're really excited about, like building something out for B2B almost and helping these teams really understand in detail, like almost like a pro version, or kind of how do you think about that use case currently, or is it not a priority?
That's definitely something we want to enable, and I think one of the core ideas we had when we started doing basically exactly 4 years ago was that we think if people are to build useful products in this space, they need to understand if people are actually adopting it, and this is pretty much sort of startup 101 stuff. And if you don't look at your actual traction, it's going to be really hard to build something useful and iterate in the right direction. So we definitely want to sort of enable that a lot. We feel like that is hugely important, and always been trying to help the teams unearth the right insights like that. But we think of Dune as a tool that we build for others. We try to make it as easy as possible to use, but we don't per se sell sort of analysis. The focus is very much still just like how can we make it as powerful and easy to use as possible today. Yeah.
First, thank you so much for the presentation, really interesting. The example you gave with the financial data is something that, yeah, you said so quarterly, we get it from a company, but now like mostly for crypto native companies, you can see it in real time, right? And as we know, so that data actually on the traditional type of companies is heavily regulated. And on Web3 side is not that much. Are you struggling already with regulation? Are you expecting it to come at some point? What's your take on that?
We haven't really had any problem with that. I think if you spend more than 5 minutes in this space, you realize that this data is pretty much public, right? Yeah. Yes. But not that it couldn't happen, but for now, I think it's pretty clear that this data is public, and sort of any company sort of can expose it. So yeah.
Yeah. So I hope it stays like that.
Yeah, me too.
We have time for one more question. Anyone wants to go?
Maybe as a follow-up to the amount of data, that's all centralized database. Have you thought or experimented with IPFS, Arweave, that kind of thing to really decentralize all the way?
Yeah, I think you need to build something useful before it makes too much sense to sort of go super deep into decentralizing it. And for us, it's still a tremendous challenge to just serve this data in a performant, convenient way as it is. So that's not to say that sort of things could happen over time, but I think our approach at least is to try to build something as useful as possible in a relatively pragmatic way, and then sort of see where that takes us, and then take it from there. So yeah, it's still pretty hard to just serve this data in a performant way as it is.
Thank you.
All right, I think we're out of time. Thank you very much, Fredrik, for the presentation.